Welcome back. Now, the illegal trade in wildlife is an additional strain on animal species, as we've been discussing. It's estimated to be worth $19 billion a year, which is a lucrative business and especially worth the risk when import controls, policing and other legal deterrents are lax. An agreement between governments, known as the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, is pressing for international coordination in this area. So to discuss what is being done, I'm joined now by the head of the CITES Secretariat, John Scanlon, who's in Geneva. Also with us is Marco Lambertini, Director General of the World Wildlife Federation International. And Marco, let me just begin very quickly by asking you, I mean, we talked in the first half about species loss, but how much is trade contributing to that?
So I think wildlife trade has been around for a long time, but in the last decade or so we've seen a major increase. Our report, Living Planet report, estimates that 37% of the population that we monitored is due to actually unsustainable consumption, and a big chunk of that is wildlife trade.
John? The CITES agreements, I mean, been around for a while, and the illegal trade in wildlife is obviously something that's very often on the front page of the news. But this WWF report and the scale of degradation of vertebrate species is really quite shocking. Do you think that the CITES efforts are doing much to help, and is the trajectory, in your mind, in the right direction?
Yeah, we've seen over the last few years a major spike in the illegal killing and related illegal trade in elephant and rhino and other species, and we're actually dealing with industrial scale poaching at the moment that is being led by transnational organised criminal gangs. So the nature of the crime and the scale of the crime has changed a bit, but the parties are responding. The 180 parties to CITES are responding, looking very closely at the entire illegal supply chain. That is from a source country through a transit country to the destination country, and we're looking at collaborative efforts right across that chain to break these transnational organised criminal gangs. How did we get here? How did we arrive at a point where 1 minute we were just talking about the trade in a few animal parts and a few different valuable elements of animals, suddenly to a stage where you're talking about industrial scale slaughter of these creatures? Well, demand's up, and the value of these products on the black market is high. We've had traditionally wildlife crime regarded as a lower level crime, whereby the nature of the penalties are low and the nature of the risk is low, but the profits are high. That's a very dangerous cocktail in terms of encouraging poaching. What we're seeing now, which is really good to see, is that an increasing number of countries and organisations are saying wildlife crime must be treated as a serious crime in the same way we treat illicit trade in narcotics or human trafficking or legal trade in firearms. We need to treat this in the same way, deploy the same sorts of techniques and the same sort of penalties we apply to other serious crimes. And work is well and truly underway in this regard. Well, this is my point, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but the fact is that despite the effort of organisations like yours, the problem here is that individual countries and governments have really been asleep at the wheel on this, haven't they? I don't think they've been asleep at the wheel. I think if you look at it, for example, the rhino, in 2007, there were only 13 poached, and that was consistent with the previous decade. From 2007 to now, we've just seen this massive spike in the illegal killing, but countries are responding. That's countries, source countries such as South Africa, with the sorts of techniques and the sorts of personnel they're deploying at a country level, and also destination countries like Vietnam are responding in terms of the demand for these illegally traded products, in particular rhino horn there. So it's going to take us more than a couple of months or a couple of years to respond effectively, but it is well underway. We're already seeing, with respect to illegal killing of elephants for their ivory, that the sharp upward trend has levelled off at far too high a level, but the trend going up has levelled off. We now need to pull that down. We can do it and we will do it, but we need to stick to our course. Marco, to your mind, has the degree of coordination between organisations like CITES and yours and governments been adequate, and to what extent are you hopeful that this is improving?
Listen, we can always do more, but we definitely commend the effort of CITES. It's a very important convention. We have launched recently our own campaign, which has been very successful, and working with other UN-related agencies, I think we have now really come together to raise the awareness at political level of the issue. But particularly, I think we're complementing each other very well, because while CITES is really dealing with a difficult job of putting regulation in place and supporting governments to enforce it, we work at the community level, we work very much on the consumers level, and there are some good news. For example, the decrease in consumption of shark fins that were a major driver on really collapsing shark populations, we know that now is actually having a major impact on consumers in countries also like Singapore and other East Asian countries where shark fins were traditionally consumed in large quantities. So we can change the attitudes. Particularly, we need to work harder on the demand, on the countries, on the demand side of the story. At the same time, support government to enforce the legislation, and thirdly, to also work with the local communities, because ultimately they're the ones who are losing out resources, particularly in Africa, where big wildlife is so important for ecotourism.
Just to highlight a couple of more glass half full issues, if you would, Marco. We're talking about what is really quite depressing elements of trade in animals. We talked about rhinos, John mentioned, and you just talked there about a couple of other species. But where can you see most of the progress being made now? And what's your next feeling about the next target that you really want to focus on?
I mean, definitely Africa is at the moment heavily targeted, particularly by poaching of large mammals, and that has got to be our priority. The decline of rhinos and elephants has been too sharp and has got to change. And again, I think working on the demand countries and at the same time enforcing legislation on the ground is going to be the answer. We have some exciting example, however, in Africa on where local communities are taking possession in a stewardship role of large conservation areas. We can actually get benefit out of either ecotourism or in some situation of some sort of exploitation of the wildlife in their territory. Then we can see that actually poaching in those areas is collapsing. And we had some other similar examples, very positive. For example, in Nepal, where for a few years we have been able to manage and stabilize zero poaching for tigers. And that's all great news that show that engaging government and local communities at the same time enforcing international legislation can make a difference.
John, do organisations like yours have enough resources, whether they be financial resources, whether they be political resources, whether they be just a recourse to legal action in any sense? Are you managing somehow to build a stronger body of action-based attempts to do something about this?
The answer is we haven't had sufficient resources or sufficient political momentum, but that is changing. And I think what we've seen over the last 24 months is unprecedented levels of political attention, high-level political attention being focused on the issue, and also unprecedented levels of international cooperation. We have 5 organisations, CITES, Interpol, UN Office of Drugs and Crime, World Customs Organisation and the World Bank, collaborating through a consortium to give coordinated support at country and regional level. Excellent examples I could go through if we had time. One example is we had 28 countries across Asia, Africa and North America collaborate in what was called Operation Cobra 2 to do a coordinated effort across source, transit and destination states to try and clamp down on this illegal trade. More countries are treating it as a serious crime. Because we've got a recognition of the scale of the threat, we are getting additional resources invested. Not enough, you always need more, but the trajectory there is in the right direction, namely more political attention, treating it as a serious crime, deploying additional human and financial resources. That's positive. We need to keep it going, but the trajectory there is going in the right direction.
All right, what is your number one priority right now? John?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you any longer.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, what is your number one priority now?
Our number one priority is to provide dedicated support to those brave people who are serving in the front lines of this fight, be they park rangers, be they police officers, sometimes military, be they customs officials, prosecutors or judges. We really need to make sure that this political interest and momentum and the financial interest is finding its way into the field, into the front lines, because that's ultimately where this fight is going to be won, and that's where we're putting most of our effort.
And Marco, finally to you, what is your next move here? Having released this report, are you happy with the amount of traction, with the amount of coverage you've had, and what are you hoping will be the greatest takeaway from having published it?
Well, I think, as John said, this is just contributing to raising the awareness and the political debate around the issue. But I think WWF, with our network of 100 in 100 countries and 5 million supporters, we're going to really continue to work very hard in the destination countries and talking to the consumers and changing attitudes, and in the source countries, supporting local communities to face this criminal impact of wildlife trade, which is ultimately impoverishing them more than anybody else.
Marco Lambertini, WWF, thank you. John Scanlon of CITES, thank you also, both of you, for being on the programme tonight. And that is it for today's show. On Tuesday on Between the Lines, the US has partially lifted the arms embargo on Vietnam. Is this just about improving ties with its former enemy, or is this also aimed at sending China a message? We'll discuss that on Tuesday on Between the Lines. Until then, check out our website, channelnewsasia.com/video. You'll find previous episodes of the programme. Goodbye for now.